Hello, this is John Snyder at the SRTR, and welcome to the third webinar in our latest series of webinars. We're making a concerted effort to put some educational materials out there for our community, and we hope you find these webinars helpful. Today's webinar is focused on offer acceptance metrics. In 2017, the SRTR began reporting both publicly and on the secure site for programs to access metrics of offer acceptance, and we thought it was timely to have an educational webinar to walk through those metrics and learn a bit about those, give you a chance to ask some questions, and hopefully we'll be able to address those at the end of this webinar. A few housekeeping items before we get going. The webinar is being recorded, and we will make it available on our YouTube channel following today's presentation. So we do have a YouTube channel. I encourage you to check that out. You can access it from our main website. Secondly, for the Q&A we will hold at the end, we're going to be accepting questions through the chat function within the WebEx system. So if you go into the Q&A of your WebEx interface, you should be able to type and submit questions, and we will try to get to those as many as we can at the end, at the conclusion of the webinar. Just would encourage you to submit your question to all panelists. There are other options available, one of them being submit to the Scientific Registry of Transplant Recipients. The best way to do this is just submit the question you have as you type to all panelists, and we'll be sure to receive those and hopefully be able to address them at the end of the webinar. With that, we'll get started. I'd like to begin by just reviewing the SRTR's role in this as part of the motivation setting up why we're reporting these metrics now. The SRTR exists as a federal contract that's let out by the Division of Transplantation within the Healthcare Systems Bureau of HRSA, the Health Resources and Services Administration. That division lets out two main contracts in the field of solid organ transplantation, one being the OPTN contract, it's managed by UNOS, of course, and the second being the SRTR contract, currently managed by the Minneapolis Medical Research Foundation here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A few notes about the mission and major deliverables of the SRTR. Our mission is to provide advanced statistical and epidemiological analyses related to solid organ allocation and transplantation in support of the Department of Health and Human Services and its agents in their oversight of the national organ transplantation system. A few main deliverables that most on this call are probably familiar with. We do support the OPTN committees with advanced statistical analyses for various, when they're debating various policy decisions, that we do our best to supply data that the committee would find useful to those deliberations. Secondly, we evaluate the performance of solid organ transplant programs, which is more directly related to today's webinar topic. And we also evaluate the performance of organ procurement organizations. So there are other deliverables, of course, but these are the main ones that I think are well known in the community. So here are the three objectives I'm hoping to accomplish on today's webinar. The first being is just discuss the motivation behind studying offer acceptance practices, to sort of set the stage. Why is this something that we are looking at? Why are we publicly reporting these metrics, and try to help the community understand that a bit more. Secondly, to describe the models that we use to derive the expected offer acceptances. Exactly how are we calculating these things? Of course, we won't get into the detailed statistics, but hopefully give you enough information so that you understand a bit about that and where you can go to find more information if you need it. And lastly, to list a few of the tools that we're providing for programs to understand and monitor these offer acceptance metrics as well. So hopefully at the end of this hour, we will have accomplished those goals, and the attendees will have learned a bit about those items. I like to start out just trying to understand who we have on the webinar. It helps us to plan future webinars and just to gain a better understanding of who our audience is today. So I will open this first poll, which is just simply to describe your relationship to the field of transplantation. And I will open the poll, and you will have 30 seconds to respond. I'll sort of watch as the respondents come in. I'd like to just understand a bit about who we have with us today. So we're about halfway complete now. I understand that there are rooms out there with multiple people in them. Simply choose the one that best describes your team if you have a team of folks listening in as well. Almost completed here. So it looks like the most represented are transplant administrators, other transplant professionals, some OPO representation as well. Great, thank you. The second poll I like to understand is just how many folks we have out there that are listening. So I'll open this poll, and just if you could just let us know, is it just you alone, or do you have a team of folks with you? Helps us better understand how many people we're reaching and plan future events as well. Almost got all the answers. Okay, I'll display the poll results in a second, and mostly it's single individuals listening, but we do have a few groups on the line as well, so I appreciate that. Let me pull the results of the poll here. All righty, great. So let's talk about a bit about the motivation behind this. There are, I think, 6 main categories as displayed on this slide that the SRTR is contractually obligated by HRSA to report on. I've grayed out 5 of the 6. Of course, we're focusing on offer acceptance today, which is listed here as acceptance and utilization of organs. But the others are waitlist activity, waitlist outcomes, post-transplant outcomes, cost and resource utilization by transplant programs, and living donor outcomes. But today, of course, we're focusing on acceptance and utilization of organs, and the contract does go on to stipulate that we should stratify these metrics by donor characteristics, for example, older donors, DCD donors, etc. So we'll show you a bit about how we're fulfilling this obligation. Here's some actual transplant contract language from the SRTR. So it states in task 3.9.1 that the contractor should develop program-specific reports or PSRs on the performance of transplant programs and organ procurement organizations, and some highlighted text from that specific task is below, that the transplant program information shall include, and then it goes on to say acceptance and utilization of organs. So that is the primary reason behind reporting these metrics. I will go on to say that these metrics were in the PSRs a while back in the mid-2000s. These were reported in the public reports. When DonorNet went into effect, the metrics were pulled from the public reports just to allow time for better understanding of the new data that was coming through the DonorNet system and the new match system. So they were pulled out of the reports at that time, and then we just have been working to get those back into the reports, which we accomplished last year. So one last poll here. Among kidneys that are eventually accepted for transplant in the last year, so in the last year I'm talking about July to June of 2017, which is a 1-year period, what proportion of offers were accepted? I'm going to open this poll in a second, but just to clarify what I mean is, so these are all kidneys that had been offered and were eventually accepted and transplanted by a program. So in other words, how many offers are actually accepted out of the ones that are put forward? So I'll open that poll, and I would love to see what people think. It's a bit tricky to word this question, right? But I'm saying, so if 100 offers were, if it took 100 offers to get a kidney placed, then that would be 1% is essentially what this means. So if it took 50 offers, so you can think about it that way too. So, okay, the poll is closed, and let me just compiling the results here. Trying to display those in a second. It looks like most picked the 15%, some the 7%. Let me display the results so you can see them. So kind of a broad range of answers here. Some chose not to answer the question. Interestingly, the least common response, it looks like, was less than 1% of offers are accepted. Happens to be the correct answer, less than 1%, and I'll show you some data on that. So if you focus on the right table here, this is in that 1-year period, and these are kidney offers here. There were 12,795 offers accepted. Okay, so these were accepted and transplanted. The total offers for kidneys of those were 1.5 million and change. And so if you do the math there, that is 0.82% acceptance of kidneys. Another way to think about that is this slide, and I wasn't able to produce 121 people here, but that translates to, for every kidney that's accepted and transplanted, it went through an average of 121 declines. Now, of course, that distribution is skewed. That there are many that are accepted early in the match run, but there are many that are also accepted late in the match run as well. And so when you average that out, you're getting about 121 offers made for every offer that's eventually accepted. And I think that surprises folks to learn that there are that many offers. And this is not counting offers after the one that was accepted. So if you got an offer at your program that you put in a provisional yes, but your program was never made primary, this is not counting any of those. So this is only offers that were made above the one that was eventually accepted. And so these were essentially offers you were primary on at some point or another in the process. So before I get into the metrics themselves and what we're reporting and how we're calculating, I like to first think about, well, why should we care? Why should we be paying attention to offer acceptance practices? And my colleague Andrew Way here is one of our senior biostatisticians with our team, and he's recently published a paper looking at various aspects of this, and I would refer you to that paper that's listed at the bottom of this slide here. And a couple points that I would just pull from that paper. We do know that higher kidney acceptance within a local area is associated with fewer kidney discards. So that relationship shown on that right slide here, as acceptance practices within an area, Andy was looking at this like all the programs within a certain DSA, for example. As those programs have higher acceptance practices, we see fewer discards of those kidneys in that area. So it's an interesting trend there. Secondly, we see less cold time, which is, I think, intuitive as well. So if we're able to place these organs faster, there's less cold time. So again, moving left to right here, as we move from programs with lower acceptance practices to programs with higher acceptance practices for offers, we see less cold time on those organs. And then lastly, similar idea to the discard, but we're in the cold time, but when you look at it in terms of how many are placed locally versus exported outside of a DSA, we see fewer exports happening in areas of the country where the acceptance practices are higher. So again, moving from left to right, in lower accepting programs, we have higher rates of export, and then to the right end of this plot, we have lower rates of export for programs that are accepting at a higher rate. So I would refer you to that paper. I think there's a lot of interesting data in that paper that supports this idea that when we look at offer acceptance practices, we're looking at in some sense, efficiency of the system. We want to keep the cold times as low as possible, of course, on these organs and get them to the right candidates as quickly as possible. And these data would support that if we are able to impact that and influence that, that maybe we would see less discard, less shipping, lower cold time. So a common question we get is, well, why not just look at the transplant rate or organ acceptance? Isn't it just important if our program accepted the organ period rather than looking at the individual offers? So first I wanted to spend a bit of time addressing that as well. So there are three commonly thought of metrics when we're thinking about sort of efficiency of the system or One could be to look at the transplant rate, one to look at the organ acceptance, and one to look at offer acceptance. So I'll just sort of take those one at a time. The transplant rate we're talking about for patients transplanted at your or listed at your program, sort of how quickly are they being transplanted, and that can be influenced by many things. But importantly, I would say that this is a candidate level evaluation. In other words, you can't adjust that transplant rate for donor characteristics. So I think the transplant rate certainly is influenced by offer acceptance, but it's also influenced by donor supply in your local area, other things that aren't necessarily related directly to whether or not the program is sort of an aggressive program in accepting offers or a non-aggressive program in accepting offers. We do report the transplant rate, of course, in the public reports, but I don't think it's the best option for considering this idea of trying to characterize programs in terms of their acceptance utilization of organs. The second metric in the middle there, organ acceptance, what we're talking about here is the probability of eventually accepting an organ that's being offered to your transplant program. Whether you accepted it for the first individual on your list or the 10th or the 100th, the question is just, did you accept it or not? It is a metric that one can look at, and it does tell something. In this one, though, it's sort of a donor level evaluation. In other words, did we take this donor? You can't adjust that type of metric for the candidate characteristics. In other words, the match between who that donor was being offered to. And there's other issues sort of statistically with using organ acceptance to classify program behavior, and I'll share that with you coming up here. So that leaves us with offer acceptance, and for this we're talking about for each individual offer, we're matching up the donor characteristics with the candidate characteristics that is being offered to, and we're making adjustments based on sort of the risk of that donor, the risk of that recipient, and what's the likelihood that that offer would be accepted relative to what your peers around the country are doing for similar offers. And here we have an offer level evaluation which is able to make those adjustments. So we think that this is the best metric that we have for trying to describe the acceptance and utilization of organs. So the limitations of the transplant rate, I've touched on some of these already. The transplant rate depends on the local organ supply and cannot account for donor characteristics. The organ acceptance rate cannot adjust for candidate characteristics and is also confounded by a few things. When I say confounded, I mean there's other things that are influencing this that really don't target the metric of interest, and I'll show you an example of that. They are mainly that's influenced by the waitlist size, and it can be influenced by the number of local programs in your area. In other words, the competition in your area can influence this, so things that are external to your offer acceptance aggressiveness. To illustrate this, I won't spend a lot of time here, but just we ran a simulation to sort of illustrate this point. We are simulating two programs here, Program A and Program B. Program A is about double the size of Program B, so they get more offers. They've got a larger wait list, for example. Each program in the simulation has a 1% chance that they're going to accept any offer. In other words, their acceptance practices are exactly the same. And when you simulate this out, we simulated acceptance of over 1,049 match runs and over 100,000 offers for these two different programs. And you can see that in the second to right column, their organ acceptance rate, Program A has 66% acceptance of these organs, whereas Program B has 35%, even though each program accepted 1% of the offers. This is an example of Program A is just a larger program and has more opportunity to accept those organs than Program B does, even though both programs would be classified similarly in terms of their offer acceptance practices. And this is what we mean by confounding sort of the metric of interest by some other factor. In this case, it happens to be the volume of those two programs. So in our opinion, offer acceptance is the best metric for summarizing this thing that we're trying to capture, which is the acceptance and utilization of organs. It accounts for local availability, it adjusts for donor quality and recipient characteristics, and it adjusts for the number of previous offers, which is very highly predictive of acceptance. In other words, we know in the models if this is the 75th offer that's been turned down 74 times already, then the model takes into account that so that it would know that the acceptance probability declines as time goes on. It's not confounded by waitlist size or the number of programs within the local DSA, so it's not confounded by the competition that your program is facing in your area. So that leads us to what we are reporting now in the new reports. And I'll take it in two different sort of chunks here. One is what do we report publicly, and what is reported and made available privately for the transplant programs to review on their secure site. Publicly, we have available now for heart, kidney, liver, and lung programs. We have offer acceptance practices, and I'll show you in detail what those look like. It includes the overall offer acceptance as well as various subcategories of what we think of as harder to place offers or more likely to be declined, those types of offers. Privately, we are providing quality control charts, what we call CUSUM charts. Those provide more detailed information for QI efforts within your program. It shows you trends over time. You can identify sudden changes in offer acceptance practices over time. And we've heard from some programs that have used those successfully and identified various issues within their program. It's been fun to hear some of the feedback on that as well. And we also provide on the private site a comparative report that gives center-level data in sort of a tabular format that you can sort and look at different categories of offers and see how your program stacks up relative to your peers or any other program that you want to see. So those are available, and I'll show you examples of what each of those look like. This is an example from a kidney report. Other reports look very similar on the public site for this. These are tables in the full PSR, so you have to search for a program on our website, and then you'll find a link to their full program-specific report in PDF format, and then you'll be able to find this table. This is an example just showing in the column labeled "This Center." This center received 8,444 offers for kidneys during that one-year period. They accepted 251 of those offers. The expected acceptance was 68.5. So right away you can see that this program appears to be a high acceptor. They have accepted 251 when our modeling would suggest they would have only accepted 68 of those kidneys. And then we have this offer acceptance ratio with the next line down, in this case 3.59. This would say that this program is accepting their kidney offers at a rate that's over 3 times higher than what our models would have suggested that are based on what other programs are doing for similar offers from similar donors. And then we have comparative columns there for their entire OPO/DSA, the entire OPTN region, or the U.S. as a whole. And so that is what we consider the overall offer acceptance practice at the program. This table is then followed by subsequent tables, and I just provide an example of one of them here, where we have categories of donors or categories of hard-to-place organs. For this example, I'm showing you what were the high KDPI kidneys. Now, we don't classify them based on KDPI. We're using the underlying score of KDRI in this case, which these would be KDRIs greater than 1.75. That happens to align with approximately a KDPI of 85% above. So these are the sort of top 15% riskiest donors. And so your program can look at the same data here, but limited to those offers. So these are offers from high KDPI donors. In this case, the center received 2,114 offers from high KDPI donors, accepted 47, and we expected them to accept about 6. So an acceptance ratio even higher than the 3.5 on the previous slide, 6 times the acceptance of high KDPI kidneys. And then you can see how that compares to other programs in your OPO-DSA, your region, and the U.S. Of course, the ratios in the U.S. are always about 1, given the modeling is sort of national average, in other words. So there's a number of those tables for each of the organs, and the categorizations are different for the different organs. I'll show you a bit about that. But those tables are then followed by these little bell-shaped curves. And these are meant to just show visually where your center falls relative to national average, which is represented by the dashed line in the middle of the bells, and all of the other programs. Now, these aren't perfectly smooth bells. They're actually approximations of the distribution across all programs. So they look a little wobbly, but that's the idea. You can see where your program stacks up. And for here, we're showing each of the curves represents one of those sub-tables that we presented. So the low, medium, and high KDPI, or high KDRI in this case, and then hard-to-place offers off to the right. The top left bell curve is the overall, so the center you can see is sort of mid-high acceptors, so there are higher accepting programs in the center, but the center is certainly to the right of the national average in terms of acceptance. I mentioned a number of these subcategories that we report. This table simply summarizes what those are for the different organs. So if you're with a heart or liver or lung program, you can sort of glance at those columns and you see what we present. For example, in the liver column, we do have subcategorizations for PHS increased infectious risk donors, DCD donors, Hep C positive donors. For each of the categorizations for the different organs, we have what we call the hard-to-place organ. For heart, liver, and lung, that's defined as greater than 50 offers. In other words, if it's already gone through 50 declines, we now consider that sort of in this hard-to-place bucket. For kidney, it's a little more liberal. It goes out to 100 offers, but the other three organs, that's defined at a cut point of 50. And then for heart, liver, and lung, we also have this distance factor baked into those tables. So if the donor was greater than 500 miles away, we give you a subclassification based on that as well. So that's what's available in the public reports. Talk about the private reporting a bit. We have what we call the offer acceptance CUSUMS. CUSUM is an acronym for basically a statistical process control chart that tracks outcomes over time. I'll show you a few examples of those. It can help identify, is your program sort of trending in an aggressive acceptance or a non-aggressive conservative acceptance. This is what one would look like if a program was trending downward. So this thing, if the line trends downward, which is true in this case from left to right, this is over the period of time. The dates are across the bottom of the screen there. Trending downward would mean that they're accepting at a rate higher than expected. Okay, so if this line was trending along just sort of horizontally to the right, that's about what we would expect based on national acceptance practices. Trending downward would happen if the program is a high acceptor. It can be a bit counterintuitive, but the way that we structure these charts, we want them to be going up if they're trending in the direction that would cause us concern. In other words, we want these trending up for offer acceptance if the program is a low accepting program. And so in this case, we have a high accepting program. The line is trending downward from left to right. And then these CUSUMs are accompanied by these types of tables. Again, we're showing the overall acceptance. So again, we have, if you look at the top left row under donor characteristics, it says overall. Then we classify the acceptance into sort of somewhat above average, low, this kind of thing. You can see that there, where we sort of classify your program. We have the number of offers, number of acceptances, and then the expected acceptances and the ratio. So you can see that for overall, as well as those hard-to-place categories as well, the low, mid, and high. In these reports, we actually have a bit more detail than what's in the public report. So for these kidney acceptances, we have the DCD donors, the PHS increased infectious risk row, the Hep C positive donors, and I think one that people have enjoyed looking at, I've gotten some good feedback about, was the weekend. Right? So offers that came to you on the weekend. In this case, this was 3,100 offers on the weekend. This program accepted 10. Expected was about 8.6, so it's pretty much in line with expected of this program. But I have heard from programs that they've been surprised by their weekend offer acceptance. In this case, on this table, this program, Hep C positive donor offers only received 2, and so perhaps that's a program who's using some of the screening fields within the UNOS system to screen out some of those offers. Accepted 0, but the expected acceptance was also very close to 0 in this case. So again, their offer acceptance ratio is approximately 1 in this case. So those tables provide some additional detail than what's in the public report. Here's a second example. This is a program whose CUSUM is trending upward. So this would be a program with a lower than expected offer acceptance rate. And if we look at the detail table for this program, overall, they received 1,475 offers in this time period, accepted 6 of those, and the expected was about 20, so 19.6, for an offer acceptance ratio of 0.37. So you can interpret that as being about a 60% lower acceptance rate than expected. And when you look at the subcategories of offers, for example, the low KDRI grouping, their offer acceptance is about half. Interestingly, for the high KDRI row for this particular program, they accepted 1 and we expected about 1, so their offer acceptance ratio is right about 1. So it doesn't appear to be their high KDPI offers that are being turned down at a higher rate. It appears to be more directed at the mid to low KDPI offers. And then, of course, we have the other categorizations as well. This program didn't receive any hepatitis C positive offers during this time frame, so 0 and 0, and their weekend acceptance is about in line with their overall acceptance in this case as well. So how is the program, if you're an administrator or your quality team is looking at these, how do you know if there's evidence to be concerned or to think of any kind of trend is happening in these charts? Here's an example where the line is sort of horizontal left to right, but it goes up and comes back down and kind of hovers around there a bit. When do we be concerned? And again, just like the post-transplant CUSUMs that we provide both what's called a two-sided, which is generally your trend line over time, and we provide a one-sided CUSUM as well, which has a statistical test tied to it that gives the program an idea, is this sort of within the realm of sort of random possibility, random noise, or is this enough evidence to think that we have a real trend here happening? So this is the two-sided CUSUM for this program, and again, it's sort of going up and coming back down, and do we have enough statistical evidence to say that this is an issue? When we look at the one-sided, these have this sort of pink background on them that describes this trigger line, and the idea here is that if the program's chart trends up high enough to hit that top red line, that's when we conclude that there's enough statistical evidence within that chart to suggest that there's a real trend happening there, and it's not just random noise in the chart. And in this example, this program's chart did not reach that red line. Certainly it was trending up toward it, so maybe there was a period of low acceptance there early on in this chart's evaluation cycle, but it didn't reach that red line, and so is it a real trend or not? We obviously can't say for certain, but I think when it hits the red line, that's when we would say that we have probably enough statistical certainty to indicate that something real is happening there. Here's another example, again, lower than expected offer acceptance. The line is trending pretty steadily upward from the left end of the chart to the right end of the chart. And when you look at the one-sided CUSUM that has the statistical test associated with it, this one did hit the line, and that's indicated by that vertical dashed line that gives you the date. The date is somewhat irrelevant because it's just when did we accumulate enough evidence to suggest that, yeah, this looks like it's a real trend of lower than expected acceptance. There's nothing magical about that date. That's just that when we accumulated enough evidence within this particular chart to make that conclusion. When that happens, the one-sided chart resets to 0. That's why you see the sharp drop-off in the line. The idea there is that if you were a quality manager at a program, perhaps when you had enough evidence to suggest this trend is real, maybe you pulled the team together and instituted some type of intervention and you want to start monitoring over again. That's why the chart resets, sort of standard practice within this type of statistical process control charting. But that's why you see this sharp drop-off when the line triggers, because the chart essentially is saying, okay, we're going to start fresh, monitor anew, moving forward. You can see this program started to trend upward again, so it doesn't appear that anything changed at that point in time, but it helps, I think, as a quality manager at a program, it helps you think about, we don't want to overreact if there's just not enough evidence yet to suggest this trend is real. So these charts are just meant to help sort of make that decision and help frame that discussion. Of course, I will, as a statistician, I'm always first to admit that we never know for certain what's happening. It still could be random noise at your program, but the chart would suggest at this point that that's probably not what's happening. There might be something worth looking at there. And again, this same program we were just looking at, here's their detail. Again, offer acceptance ratio is about 0.37, so as a quality manager, you can look and see what types of offers do we appear not to be accepting very often. Perhaps there's ways to use those screening fields within UNET to maybe not entertain those offers if we're unlikely to accept them. I mentioned a comparative report. This is an example of what's available through the SRTR secure site. Here you can see each row is a program, and there are different tabs of this chart for the different characteristics of the donor. So you see across the top high KDPI or KDRI offers, PHS increased risk, et cetera, DCD offers. So you can actually look at all programs in the country and see where they fall on these metrics. I think it's helpful if there are programs you wanted to have conversations with about, well, how come we look this way and you look like you're a much higher acceptor of these types of offers? You know, can we talk about that? What can we learn? And vice versa. If there are low accepting programs, what can we learn as a community? I think a lot of discussions happening now about efficiency of the system, and I think these type of data are meant to help further those discussions as well. So how do we estimate these? A few statements about this, and again here my goal is to not get into the statistical weeds of this, but just to point you in a direction so that you can find information that you might need. A few words about what offers are actually being evaluated. For inclusion criteria, we look at offers that are eventually accepted. So we're not looking at organs that nobody eventually accepted. We're not looking at offers past the acceptance. So we're looking at offers to candidates on a single wait list. Only exceptions are the kidney pancreas candidates receiving an offer for kidney alone. So on the kidney panc list, you can say I'm a kidney patient, but I'm willing to entertain kidney alone offers. If that's the case, we would evaluate those as well. But we're not looking at we're trying to not look at the multi-organ patients, just given the different characteristics and different issues going on in that population. For exclusion criteria, we do not consider bypassed offers. So if there was an expedited placement and your candidate was bypassed on the list for whatever reason, we aren't counting that quote unquote against the program. So those are considered offers that you actually never received. We do not look at match runs that don't have an eventual acceptance. So if the organ was discarded or never recovered, those match runs are not considered. All offers after the acceptance are removed. So once that organ is accepted, and any provisional yeses after that point would not be considered, and a no after that point. If a program had entered a no, even though they were never made primary, that is also not considered. If a match is rerun, we do combine the match runs for that donor, and we would remove any duplicate offers. So you're not going to be dinged twice if your match run was rerun for any reason. Those match runs are sort of combined together and any duplicate offers are removed. Complicated diagram here, but this just sort of gives a general feel of how we build the models to estimate the acceptance practices at the programs. We build the cohort of offers that are being entertained by the programs based on those inclusion and exclusion criteria described on the previous slide. We split the population up. We found it better to create better models to do this, what we call stratifying these models into these categories here. This is what I'm showing you is how we do it for kidneys. So we split it into pediatric offers and then the low, mid, and high KDRI donors. And we build individual models within those groups of donors. And then we combine the results from all of that to derive an expected acceptance number for your program. And that allows us to then derive those offer acceptance ratios for the program. A number of factors go into those models. I can't detail them all on this webinar, but I'll point you to where you can find the information. Here I'm just showing you what is currently included in the kidney offer acceptance models. So a number of factors, candidate factors, donor factors, and then some factors of the combination of candidate and donor. For example, the ratio of the body surface area of the donor to the candidate, the distance between the donor and the candidate, how many HLA mismatches there were, was the donor local or non-local to the candidate, et cetera. And you can see everything that's included there. And these models, I'll point out on the donor one, again, they do include the offer number, so we do know if your program received the 100th offer, the likelihood that that's accepted is lower than if it was the first offer. So that's all taken into account into the model as well. So that's just the kidney. I will show you where you can find more information for the other organs. We do have offer acceptance model documentation available on the public website. If you go to our reports and tools, and the website is www.srtr.org, under reports and tools you will find this risk adjustment models for offer acceptance. That's where you would go to find this tool, and I've just taken a few screenshots of it here to give you a sense of what you'll find. You would first choose the organ on this left panel, and then we have various model strata, and this is referring back to that diagram where we split the donor offers up into various strata based on those characteristics, and so you would choose which strata you want to see. The one shown on the screen here is the mid-range KDPI, or the KDRI is between 1.05 and 1.75, which is the mid-range KDPI offers. We do allow you to download a CSV file, which can open up in Excel or other spreadsheet programs. That contains the full model, so if you have statisticians on staff who are savvy with these types of models, this would allow them to actually implement the model or play with the model within your organization. The whole model is there. So that is that button. And then we have these plots that you can choose to actually see what the effects are. So in this case, it's showing in the little drop-down the CDC high-risk donors, the PHS increased risk, infectious risk donors. If you choose an element like that to see the effect, you will get a plot like this one shown on this slide, and then this is showing if somebody was on ECMO at the time the candidate's offer was received, what's the likelihood that that offer would be accepted. In this case, it's above the line of 1 for the yes answer. If they were on ECMO at the time of listing is what this element is. That you see there in the box that the odds ratio says 1.385, and that's saying that if the candidate was on ECMO at the time they were added to the waiting list, the odds that they would accept that offer is 38, almost 39% higher than if they were not on ECMO at the time of the listing. That's how these can be interpreted. That was for a yes-no response. For things like donor age, we have linear effects of those things. Some of them can be curves. In this case, it's a straight line. And this is saying someone relative to the age of 40, if the donor was age 40, the likelihood of that offer being accepted if the donor was age 65, here you see an odds ratio of 0.49. So that's saying that there's lower, about half the likelihood that that's going to be accepted if the donor is 65 relative to if the donor was 40. So you can look at all types of the factors in the model and see what those effects are. I would caution you that there are sometimes there are effects in these models that are interactions with other factors in the model, and so there might be some that you would look at those effects and think, oh, that looks strange, or I don't understand that. Always just email us, and we're happy to walk you through what these effects look like and how to interpret those and help understand some of these effects. I wanted to conclude with this offer acceptance decision tool that we've been developing just internally and sort of playing with this idea a bit is, could we somehow translate these types of ideas to some type of a tool that perhaps we can make available on the website for programs to play with. The idea is here you can enter donor characteristics into this tool and your candidate's characteristics, various things about them. And then it would display these types of persona graphs where we've got a 10 by 10 grid of little green people and gray people, and it gives you a sense that if you accepted this offer, then what might happen. And so you can see at the top of the chart that's sort of blown up at the right there, it says, if you accept, 92 out of 100 people have graft function 3 years from now. Okay, so that's saying that given the characteristics of the donor and the candidate that you entered into this tool, what do the models project would be the outcome for that patient if you accept that offer? Okay, so this one, in this case, it was 92 out of 100 people would still have graft function with that kidney at 3 years. And then below that says, and if you decline. So if you decline, then only 52 out of 100 people would have graft function at 3 years. And this takes into account the idea that if I then say decline and then I wait for another offer. So the tool is predicting out what happens to patients that have declined a similar offer and then what happens to them down the road. And in this case, compared to the 90-some % likelihood that they'd have graft function at 3 years, it goes down to 52 if they decline that offer. And then you can sort of move those characteristics around in the tool and get different results and see how those affect the likelihood that the patient would have graft function 3 years down the road. Same things are there for patient survival. So the ones I just showed you last is the graft functioning. Now it's showing you how many are actually still alive. And again, it stratifies that if you accept how many are alive at 3 years, if you decline how many are alive at 3 years. And finally, I think a neat part of this tool that Dr. Wei on our team has been developing, it has what we call the ability to enter donor pool restrictions. And so the idea here is, if I wanted to say, well, I'm going to wait, but I'm only willing to wait for a KDPI that's below 70 in this example, and a max cold time of 20 hours, this tool would allow you to put those numbers and those types of restrictions on the donor pool into the tool, and then you would be able to see how that would affect the patient's likelihood of graft function and survival if you do and if you don't have those types of restrictions on the pool. Because we find that most people would say, well, I didn't take this offer, I'm going to decline it because I'm going to wait for a better KDPI or an organ with lower cold time on it. And this type of a feature on the tool allows you to sort of put those ideas into the mix so that you can see how those might affect the outcomes for your patients. So those were the objectives I was hoping to get through. I want to be sure to leave a few moments for Q&A. Hopefully I achieved those 3 objectives. I want to acknowledge Dr. Wei, our primary biostatistician who's worked on all of these offer acceptance metrics over the past few years. And he's actually here with me. He can help address any questions you may have as well. So we'll move, before I get to a few of the questions, just a few references here that if you wanted to look, these papers are available on the SRTR website directly. So just go there and look for the publications, but I mentioned some of these on the call already, so if you want more information, you can find it there. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to our communication specialist, Mona Shatter, is here with me, and she's been finding the questions that have come in as I've been talking, and will walk us through some of the Q&A, and I'll do my best to address them.
Thanks, Dr. Snyder. The first question we have is, can you clarify the numerator and denominator in the offer acceptance ratio?
Sure, do my best. The numerator is how many offers you actually accepted. So let's say you accepted, oh yeah, so well, okay, Andy was waving me a sign language here. So let's first talk about what's going into the metric. So the numerator is really how many offers you accepted divided by how many you were offered. Okay, so now let's say you received 100 offers and you accepted 10. The ratio of those is going to be 10 divided by 100, so a 10%, but that's not the ratio. The ratio is the expected, right? So we're deriving the expected acceptances from the model. So let's say you accepted 10 and the model projected that you would accept 15. The ratio of those is going to be 10 to 15. Now, if you were astute and noticed that if you divide 10 by 15, that's not actually the offer acceptance ratio that's shown on the table. That's because similar to the post-transplant outcomes, we're applying sort of a Bayesian framework to this, and we're adding 2 to the numerator and 2 to the denominator of that ratio. And so instead of it being 10 divided by 15, it's going to be 12 divided by 17, and that will give you the offer acceptance. And there's a lot of statistical theory behind why that's a good thing to do. We'd be happy to walk you through that. Simply email us if you want more instruction on why that's being done. But it's very similar to what's being done on the post-transplant outcomes as well.
Okay, the next question is, will this data be made available at some point that will allow comparison between pediatric programs only?
Good question. We don't have that stratified in the reports now. Certainly if there are programs out there that only are doing peds, then of course their data is only showing for their pediatric recipients. But we don't stratify those metrics currently by adult and peds. But that's certainly something we can make note of if that would be of interest. Maybe send me an email if you think that that would be helpful for us to make that stratification, and we can certainly think about adding that into the system in the future.
Next question is, where do you find the offer acceptance calculator? Also, where do you find the report that compares the organ offer acceptance for all programs?
The offer acceptance calculator, the one that I showed you at the conclusion of the webinar there, isn't actually live yet. It's been under development, and our advisory committee has seen early drafts of it. We will be presenting that again, the latest version, to our advisory committee at our meeting in April. And so we're hopeful that we'd be able to make that tool available. There's some debate as to whether that tool should be publicly available or available only on the SRTR's private site. So those debates are being had. If you have an opinion about that, I'd love to hear it. I'll give you contact information in a moment on how to reach us. But it's currently not publicly available. The second part of the question was, where do we find those comparative reports on the Secure site? They are there. It depends sort of when you're looking at our Secure site currently as to where you find them. Best thing to do if you're having trouble is just email our support line at srtr@srtr.org, and we'll be happy to walk you through where exactly to find those. Having said that, I will make the community let you know that we are close to finalizing a completely revised version of our Secure website that we're hoping to launch mid-year this year, sort of in final phases on that. We hope that that website will be vastly easier to use. So we're looking forward to launching that this year. But for now, if you're having trouble locating those reports, just send us an email, and we'll be happy to point you directly to where that's at.
The next question is there any evidence on the relationship between offer acceptance and graft loss, i.e. high acceptance correlating with increased graft loss?
Dr. Way, you want to take it?
Yeah, so we have not looked at that specific question, but we have looked at the relationship between transplant rate ratios and post-transplant outcomes, and in general, those are not associated with worse adjusted or unadjusted post-transplant outcomes. And transplant rate tends to be highly correlated with offer acceptance. There are some notable differences, and I also would be somewhat skeptical that there would be an association, just because both offer acceptance, I would be skeptical there would be an association with adjusted post-transplant outcomes, because both the offer acceptance and post-transplant risk adjustment models adjust for donor and candidate characteristics, but it is possible there could be an association between high offer acceptance and worse unadjusted outcomes.
Right. In other words, more aggressive acceptance may yield worse unadjusted actual survival. When you do the adjustment for the types of donors that the programs are using, that relationship no longer exists.
Yeah, correct.
Next question is, what is the reasoning behind looking at 4 months for the offer acceptance ratios across donor characteristics table?
Yeah, the reports in the public report cover a 1-year span, and the CUSUM charts that we're making available are covering a 4-month span. I think that there's no great answer for that. In the CUSUM reports, we thought it was better to just limit it down to a more narrow time frame, simply because of the number of offers that are being generated. The CUSUM reports are presenting that sort of more real time, and that report updates every month. But so just to be clear, on the public site, it's a 1-year time window, and then the CUSUM and the associated reports on the Secure site cover a narrower time window.
Next question is, how is the signal threshold determined?
Yeah, great question. I didn't touch on that in the report. What's happening is we're generating, the idea behind the signal threshold is meant to be that if it hits the threshold, the likelihood that that's a false positive is about 5%, okay? And we simulate that threshold location independently for every program that we generate a report for, because it's based on what your expected levels of acceptances are across the range of the chart, and so it's going to be different for every program. And so what's happening in the background during the development phase of these charts is we're running simulations at your program, and we're seeing if your program is accepting exactly at the rate we would expect, what would your chart look like? And we run that over and over and over many times, and then we look at how high those charts get throughout the phase of the chart, and we draw that signal threshold at a place where about 5% of the charts would hit that line. And so that is, the way to interpret that line is if your chart hits the line, the likelihood that that's false and that there isn't really a trend happening is about 5%. So if you were to compare where that line is for different programs, it's going to be in different spots, and that's why. It's tailored specifically to your program.
The next question is, when the two-sided CUSUM hits the signal limit, what does this signify? Is this low acceptance?
Yes, and so, yeah, just to be clear, we call that chart the one-sided CUSUM. The two-sided one is the one that just shows the trend over time, and then that has an associated one-sided chart with it. We call it one-sided because it's not allowed to go down. It just only shows you where the chart's going up, and then if it reaches the bottom, it sort of flattens out at the bottom of the chart. But yes, it's drawn that way so that it's going up when you're having low acceptance practices relative to what the national acceptance practice is. And if it hits the chart, if it hits the signal, that's when we say we have a 5% chance or less that that's a false positive hit. So that's how that's designed.
Our next question is, in reviewing the organ offer reports, how do centers identify which specific organs were hard to place? Is there a field in the report, or will there be in the future to identify these organs?
Yeah, so this is Andy again. So this has been a common question that we've received over the past couple of months, and so we're planning to basically create the data sets for programs to identify this when the reports are generated, because right now the process for getting that data is basically you have to contact us and request it through a simple data request. So for the July PSR cycle, programs should be able to relatively easily get that data if they're interested.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Andy. Yep. Things to come. We've heard feedback that people would like to have those data sets that accompany these offer acceptance charts. So right now, we don't have those on the site itself, but we will be putting those on mid-year this year so that you'll have direct access to those reports. And those will show you which of the offers were, quote-unquote, hard to place and meet the other characteristics as well. Well, we're at the top of the hour now. If we weren't able to get to your questions, I apologize for that. We will respond to all questions. I believe we have the capability, Mona, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, we do. We will respond to your question directly through email if we weren't able to get to it. And I will just flip to this last slide. We've been doing our best to keep the community informed of what's happening, and the best ways to do that, we have Twitter, at SRTR News. We have a LinkedIn as well as a YouTube page. We also have a newsletter you can sign up for through our website. Please utilize all of that and feel free to hit us with any questions you might have. The best website is, or best email is srtr@srtr.org. Thank you all for your participation today, and I look forward to continued interactions with you, and certainly send us any feedback you have about today's webinar. Thank you all very much.